Okay, good morning everybody. I trust you're all ready for a day of informative talks on diverse topics related to our objective for the CitA conference, and that is transforming the procurement landscape in a construction for improved value and reduced risk. That's a lot of words there and a lot of bandwidth for presentations, but we actually have done quite well on the first 2 days that we have had. We'll talk about those later on in the afternoon. My name is John McGowan. I'm currently chair of the CitA Board of Directors, and I will be chairing this opening session this morning. This is a very special day for us in CitA, as this event is the first face-to-face we have been able to organise since the emergence of COVID all the way back to the spring of 2020. And the newly opened Gibson was the location where we held many of our breakfast seminars 10 years plus below. So there's a bit of nostalgia about that again. But enough nostalgia, and we need to move now to the forward looking. And before we launch into the presentations, I want to thank our sponsors, many of whom I recognise after all these years. They have been very, very faithful in their support of CitA down through the last 15 years. For this event, our platinum sponsors are Arups, Diatec, CISC, Procad and Celebri. Our gold sponsors are Current Bim Management, Invicara, Cosmo and SIS. On the actual way we're going to run this here, we will take questions at the end of each session. So if you're looking online, you can actually put your questions into the chat box. We will have somebody monitoring that. And in addition to taking questions from the floor here. So our first speaker today to get on to business is Paolo Giani, who will speak on the UK government's initiative to streamline the approach to public procurement. A pretty weighty topic, but a very essential one in the digitization process. So over to you, Paolo, to introduce yourself and to deliver your presentation.
Thank you. Morning, everyone. Thank you for the introduction. I'm Paolo Giana from Bureau Apple. I work as a senior information management consultant. And today I'm going to talk to you about the implementing of the gold standard in the construction procurement with a focus on the integrated information management contract. Just to give you a brief understanding of the concept, basically my background is I work in academia for a while, and then I moved to consultancy. Is where I focus my attention to collaborative procurement and the needs for information management and BIM to use collaborative procurement in order to get it work according to the needs and the request of the standard that we have at the moment, such as ISO 19650. My presentation is going to start from the meaning and the concepts that are included in the gold standard, moving on to the concept of the IIMC and his core, that is FSC1. After that, I'm just going to briefly talk about the main concept of the IIMC and a couple of case studies that have been applied to, and the trend of the contract itself. As I mentioned, the UK Cabinet Office involved Professor David Mosey in an independent review of the public sector in order to understand the concept of construction frameworks. What was the reason to get to this point? The reason was to understand and get the most out of the public money that has been spent in the UK in order to get the most out of them, a deep review and a change in the prospect of how the framework are run is needed. For that reason, constructing the gold framework has been an interview of the industry. Over 120 clients and industry consultants have been interviewed. And Professor David Mosey in December 2021 published 24 recommendations for the industry. Out of that, the main outcome of this recommendation is one of them at least, is the fact that FAC1 as a gold standard framework could provide a lot of benefits in terms of quality, improved safety, social value, and environmental value, with over 18.5 agreed advantage in terms of saving there. Across those recommendations, FAC1, especially the gold standard, focus especially on I will focus on one of them. That is the recommendation number 12. That is in terms of information management and BIM. Just by citing these recommendation, the gold standard cite to create the all-life golden thread of asset information using BIM and other digital technologies integrated under a framework alliance contract. We all know that BIM is based on the collaborative topic. But in order to get that, if you are in a complex scenario, especially in a framework where multiple projects, or related or unrelated, are all together in the same, under the same umbrella, we need to set up common rules. Otherwise, we are in a situation where normally a PMC needs to relate with different contracts, with different specific agreement, and the outcome for the client could be decreased in terms of managing those information that could be siloed and not completely related, because the structure of those information could be unlinked. If we start from the topic of ISO 19650, where collaboration is a key point, where collaboration between participants involved in the construction project and the asset information is pivotal to the efficient delivery and operation of assets, we can understand why two-party contracts can't provide the need of collaboration in such a scenario. For that reason, in the gold standard, an integrated information management contract has been suggested as a potential source of managing information management and BIM. What is the reason? The reason is that if we create an umbrella and we set a common rule for all the parties involved, we are able to share information, agree on a common standard, and get the most out of what is really information management. If we think about what ISO 19650 claims and requests in terms of collaboration, in terms of document that need to be co-edited, or if we think about the relation that we need to have in terms of information across the different party and the supply chain that is involved in a framework agreement or even in a complex scenario, if we do not have such a scenario where all the consultant, contractor, supply chain, and clients are involved in the same scenario, there could be a difference in terms of information, responsibility, and intellectual property rights. For that reason, as I explained with my background before, Professor David Mosey, Daria Baram, Roxana Vornico, and I work a few years in academia alongside the with the industry in order to provide an instrument that is called the IIMC, that has been recognized both in the gold standard and by CDBB, as a suitable approach to manage information management alongside in a multi-party collaborative environment that could provide the industry to manage information in a digital environment for the whole life cycle. For that reason, we started working on a standard form of contract that is FAC1, that is well recognized in the UK as a leading framework agreement that has been used in different occasions by different clients, as you will see later. Just to state, this is not an academic exercise that has been widely used in the UK and been recognized by different entities. As I mentioned, we work alongside the industry in order to get confirmation and improve the way to use FAC1 as an integrated information management contract. This model is based on the fact that it doesn't amend the individual roles and appointments of each party that is involved normally in a contract. It creates an overarching approach that can embed different contracts that have been stipulated or not, that can be stipulated after, and provide a contractual system that needs to integrate the roles and the appointments to create and sustain a shared understanding of information management. As I mentioned, creating an overarching approach can provide the industry with a common standard for complex scenario and for framework themselves, especially creating those kind of relations that normally are not set up with only two-party contracts. If we think about, as I mentioned, intellectual property rights, it is really hard to cross-link different parties that are not involved in a two-party contract itself. Just to mention, if you look at the citation in the slide that you probably will receive later, you will find both the white paper and the recommendation that CDBB published before. But what is FAC1? What are the pillars that we can find in FAC1? FAC1 is able to help the intention of the parties involved in the framework and in the alliance itself. It is able to align the objective and the success measure that can be set in the alliance itself to align the intent of each party to get the most out of the project and the goal that needs to be reached. For this reason, information needs to be shared across all the parties. That can be included in the framework brief, in the framework proposal, and collaborative included in the timetable that is developed by all the parties and the alliance member that are included in the contract itself. We will deep into the main characteristic of FAC1 later in the presentation. In order to get that, the integration is a key point of FAC1 and collaborative contract. For that reason, we are able to integrate the different parties, create common scenario and common point for all the clients. That could be multiple clients, consultant, contractor, and the supply chain. Through an early involvement of the contractor and the supply chain, we can get the most out of the industry, because we need to be aware that the industry itself has a lot of knowledge to share to get the most out of the project itself. Sometimes even through the medium of incentivization, it is important that the client could have the opportunity, if they want, to set some rules in order to incentivize the people involved, and sometimes it's really useful. But it doesn't mean that needs to be a specific way in which we can incentivize. We can provide more work, and this is sometimes, most of the time, what the industry is looking for, to get more work out of the job. As I mentioned, FAC1 and the IIMC works not to change the attitude of the industry. I will, oh, yeah, is there? Okay, no, it was disappearing. Okay. We talk about BIM and digital technologies. This is what we get. As I mentioned, FSC1 is not, does not aim to change the attitude of the industry. We want to create an umbrella that can embrace different contracts without changing the contractual, let's say, way of working of the clients. For this reason, what we understood from an analysis of the industry in a worldwide scenario was that most of the time clients are not so welcoming in terms of changing their contractual attitude. For that reason, an overarching umbrella that embed different kind of contract, such as FIDIC, and those are just examples. There can be an infinite number of standard or custom contract that can be used within FSC1, that can be embedded within FSC1. And as I mentioned, it can include, since the beginning or during the evolution of the project, more party. It can include more than one client and more than one consultant or contractor, provider or supplier. This is a standard form of contract that embed the complex scenario that we are facing at the moment in our project. But it doesn't work only for a single project. It can work for multiple projects that could be related or unrelated. And this is a wide and powerful form of contract that can provide to the industry a way to get the most out of the money that are involved in that are provided from the client. But it can be used not only from a client perspective. It has been used even from a contractor perspective that want to manage his own supply chain, or from a consultant perspective that can be used for his supply chain. So this is a very versatile form of contract that can be used in different scenarios and for different point of view. The core of this presentation is information management and BIM, and this is the way that we envisage, alongside with a lot of companies and the industry itself, that it could be a very powerful instrument for managing information modeling. Why? Because we can create a relationship across the different parties that are involved there. And this is a key point if we are in a complex scenario where there are multiple parties involved and we want to set common rules and set a unique way to manage information, not leaving them in the silos that are created by contracts. Just to give you a brief idea, this contract is not being used only in the UK. It has been used across the world in a different country. And this is just a small list of countries where it's been used and translated there. It is a really powerful instrument that had been worldwide used. Just to give you a brief idea, and this is not to bore everyone during this presentation, how the contract itself works. It includes many alliance members that can be composed by client and additional client, as I mentioned before, in-house or external alliance manager, that is the party that should manage the alliance, and can include, in any point in time of the contract, can include multiple alliance members that could be included along the evolution of the project. And this is a powerful instrument, especially if we want to include the supply chain and get the most out of them. As I mentioned, the alignment of objective is a core of this powerful instrument. And to get the most out of them, we need to align the alliance member into getting into that point. To get there, we need to set common success measures and targets that can align the different parties involved. And as I mentioned, we can directly proceed toward an awarding or a competitive award procedure in order to get more job into the alliance that is not yet defined at the beginning, or can become from an improvement that has been suggested by the alliance member. And this is a powerful and manageable instrument that the industry could use. And the improved value is the core point of those kind of instruments. Because the client wants to get the most out of those value. Value for money is a core policy that a lot of governments all around the world are aiming for. And the supply chain can provide a lot of value if we involve them as soon as possible in the overarching approach. Because they can provide a lot of knowledge that is normally not listened at the beginning. If we think about, just for example, about the well-known McLeamy curve, we understand that the sooner we get a decision, the better it is for the project. And this is why the supply chain can provide a lot of value. But if we think about the core group that is composed by the core alliance member, they can use and compile a risk register that is developed along the evolution of the project in order to get and share risk that could be across contract. And this is a key point, because if we are in a scenario where we have multiple contracts involved and there is an interlink across some of them, we can use an early warning procedure to get risk, to de-risk the project itself. And as I mentioned, this scenario, this contract could be used under multiple legislation in a worldwide scenario, defining legal requirement and special terms. As I mentioned, this is not an academic exercise. It's a contract that has been developed 6 years ago, in 2016, and has been used on over 90 billion pounds of work in the last 6 years. And this is just a list, a small list of client, contractor, and consultant that use this approach. It has been used by Crown Commercial Service, NHS, LHC, but also from contractors such as Kier and Skanska. And they use it for a different purpose, as I mentioned, for managing their supply chain, for example. This is a quite growing market in the UK and also in other legislation, especially for companies that are based in a worldwide scenario that want to use collaboration to get most out of their money. And also the use of FAC1 as an IIMC, so an integrated information management contract, has been tested in different scenarios, from small to large projects. And this is just a couple of examples. This has been used by the Ministry of Justice in their new Alliance for New Prison program to deliver those new prison, that is an award of £1 billion, but also has been used in smaller cases, such as, for example, the Liscate school in Italy, that is just a £5 million of work. So it's a really powerful and versatile instrument. Just to conclude, if we started our discussion talking about collaboration and the principle included in the gold standard. We know that collaboration is a key point that we need to embrace in our industry, and also from a contractual perspective, not only in terms of information management. Contract needs to relate to this perspective and linking two-party contracts. For this reason, FSC1 creates a BIM data transparency that can collate all the effort and the exchange of information across the party and the team involved to provide the reliance of those data that can be used along the evolution and the iteration of the project. As I mentioned, FSC1 is a powerful contractual instrument that can be used as IIMC as envisaged in Project 13 and can create a bridge across the contracts, the multiple two-party contracts appointment that are set in a complex scenario. For that reason, the industry could gain a lot out of it, solving many issues such as intellectual property rights and collaborative editing. And this is just a few points there. But if we think about the other point that has been raised, that is the supply chain involvement and the collaborative evolution of the project, a collaborative timetable and flexible risk register can get the project rolling and the alliance improving the outcome of the project itself. This is, as I mentioned, this is the early warning part, and just to finalize the presentation, this contract and this standard has been used in multiple occasions and different scenarios in order to implement the requirement of ISO 19650 in different scenarios, from small to larger instances. And this is those are just a couple of examples to give you an idea of the briefly to understand what are the scenarios that can be involved from a smaller to a quite large project. Thank you.
Right away, there's one obvious comment that you're actually able to have applause, which we can't have if it was on Zoom. So I'm sure that your presentation is going to attract a lot of questions, which we will take at the end. And I've no doubt that some of them will be seeking some frank feedback from the clients on the use of the FAC1 program. Okay, our next speaker is Mairéad Phelan. Is Mairéad here? Oh, and Mairéad is going to speak on the use of building controls systems as a preferred means of managing the building regulations process. Mairéad, I haven't met you before. You're very welcome.
Thank you very much for inviting me here today. And I actually didn't realise the heading on the conference was transforming the procurement landscape for improvement value and reducing risk. And that's a very important title actually in the context of what I'm going to talk to you about, because what I really want to talk to you about is what's the purpose of your procurement? The purpose of procurement is to provide good quality buildings. And the purpose of the building regulations, which is my remit, is to provide for the health, safety and welfare of people in or about buildings. Conservation of fuel and energy and access for all. Just very, very, common requirements that everybody should have and everybody should have a right to. Safe, healthy buildings with lots of ventilation, light, comfortable heat, water, etc. So what I'm saying is that really, in my view, transforming the procurement landscape for improved value and reducing risk is building right the first time and building once, and stop this remediation and come back and forth on buildings, having competent people in the building process. So in 2014, Minister Hogan, in the light of the serious failures in the construction sector, brought in the SI9 of 2014, that is the Building Control Management System. He also, as part of this project process, introduced mandatory inspections and the mandatory professional involved in all parts of the construction process, with a standardised system to administer this, called the Building Control Management Process. It's the IT system that's the preferred means of building control administration in Ireland, and we were tasked to do that piece of work. It was a very innovative piece of legislation, probably the most innovative piece of legislation, building control, for that 30 years. Basically, just a little bit about ourselves. We were tasked to do that in 2014. In 2017-18, We were made a shared service for the purpose of building control in Ireland. That's to promote the health, safety, welfare of people and promote compliance, a culture of compliance within the building industry with the building regulations. 2020 then they added on the construction products regulations in light of the product failures that occurred. So now we're a shared service in that. Shared services are a service provided on behalf of 31 local authorities by one local authority, and that is Dublin City Council put its hand up for this. So we're a small business unit, independent within Dublin City Council, with two purposes. One is to promote compliance with the requirements of the building regulations, and the other is to promote compliance with the construction products regulations, for which we are market surveillance authorities. We also are the regulators for the EU Energy Performance in Buildings regulations, which is attached to the building control suite of legislation. That's just the suite of legislation that we work under, and the building control legislation is quite a large framework. It came out in 1990, believe it or not. Some people actually wouldn't, you wouldn't think it by looking at some of the buildings now and again we look at, but some buildings are great. But it provided for the making of building regulations, and the building regulations are the design requirements of buildings. There's 12 parts to those, 48 functional requirements, and then it put forward control mechanisms to show how you comply with the requirements of these building regulations. Building control authorities also have functions, as I said, under market surveillance, the market surveillance authorities, and they also regulate the EU energy performance and building regulations. So we have a European dimension as well as a national dimension in our office, and we support local authorities in achieving compliances. That's just the requirements of what you're procuring for to produce compliant buildings. With 12 parts, as I said, of the building regulations, and every single part, you must comply with every single part of these regulations. Every works or building must be constructed in accordance with the requirements of the building regulations separately and in their separate parts. And if you go and put an extension to a building, you mustn't reduce any of these compliances as part of your extension or remediation or amendments or material alterations. So that's just what that says. It's design requirements. Then we have the suite of the building control regulations. These are control mechanisms put in as part of the legislation, and they control how you comply with the requirements of the design requirements. So as part of this, you have basically three control mechanisms. One is the commencement notice. That's the notice to commence. I'm submitting a notice to commence to a building control authority. I'm commencing this building. And these are all my documents, plans, calculations that I'm submitting with this to show that I'm actually completing this building in compliance with the requirements of the building regulations. Then you have the certificates, that's the fire safety certificates, the disability access certificates, to show how we comply with Part B and Part M of the regulation. B being fire safety and Part M being access and use. Then you have certificates of compliance, and certificates of compliance are produced when certain buildings are completed, and they are signed by professional, competent people to say that we've built this building in compliance with the building regulations, and Part A to M is compliant. And these are all my documentations to show compliance. The other control mechanism is the National Building Control Register, which is on the front of the BCMS, and that is the register of buildings that have been constructed in Ireland since 2014. So that's the control mechanism for the general public to see what's been built, where it's been built, who's building it, and why are they building it, or the builder, owner, designer. Just to get the project off the ground, and that's the building control, the administration part. The local government management agency, which is the umbrella group for the 31 local authorities in Ireland, had a shared service office, and they have called a portal called localgov.ie, where you should be able to get most services that all the 31 local authorities to provide. We and the National Building Control Office and BCMS, you go to the website and you hit on that and you come to our website, which is the National Building Control Management System, where you submit your notices, your applications and your certificates. This is a simple enough system. We, as I said, if you saw on the previous slide, we had 29 forms of applications, forms of notices, forms of certificates. So it's only administration system. It collects a lot of data on compliance with the building regulations. So what do we do with that data? At the moment, we have over 151,000 customers registered on the system. We have 2.3 million compliance documents. That's since 2014. If we had 10,000 compliance documents in the previous 30 years since 1990 in the 31 local authorities, that's about as much as we have, because prior to that it was a paper-based system with no mandatory requirement for competent building professionals. We have 125,000 projects in the system, and of that 125,000, there's 95,000 building projects valid. So there's probably about 20 to 25,000 projects in that system that are in progress at the moment, that are coming on stream. So we're able to look at the system and see how busy it is, coming on stream, whatever, who's doing what. It's a system that operates 24/7, 365 for the last, since 2014. We have people operating in about 63 countries submitting notice applications and certificates. And it's actually, there's never a time in 24 hours that there's not somebody working on it, which is an interesting prospect. And during COVID, we did notice that a lot of people actually wander off to the four corners of the earth to work, which is quite interesting that we can provide a system that the only place where we reduced the URL and traffic was from Russia recently. The system then, the information that comes into the system, we can see that we have block buildings, we have brick, we have concrete, we have stone, we have a mixture of masonry, concrete and brick, 21,000 there, 25,000 or 20, can't read that. So it tells us the commencement notice by year. We have 4 types of commencement notices. There's a commencement notice with supporting compliance documentation that was provided for an SI9 of 2014. We have the ordinary commencement notice for the smaller pieces of work and smaller extensions that was prior to 2014. 7-day notices where you will commence a building without having a valid fire safety certificate, and you must sign a declaration to say that whatever the Building Control Authority provides for in conditions, you will do that, even if you have to tear down the building, which is quite onerous and expensive. The other there, one you'd look at is the commencement notice with opt-out declaration. In 2015, because of some pressures on the government, they reduced the requirement for the mandatory competent person and mandatory inspections for one-off houses. And that has been growing since, which is a shame because a lot of these do require competent people in the building process. So, as I said, the purpose of the data that we collate in the BCMS system, which is just a huge database of all the work that's carried out on buildings in Ireland, is to demonstrate how you're going to comply with the requirements of the building regulations. And as I said, that's just a slide which shows you how the commencement notice with opt-out declaration has grown since it came in, and how the commencement notice with the supporting compliance documentations, that is the reduction of competent people in the building process, has decreased since that came in. We also, during lockdown in 2020, we provided online the fire safety certificates, the regularisation certificates and the disability access certificates. Industry had a lot of complaints about slowness in delivering on granting of fire safety certificates, etc. This information that we're collecting now gives us quite a lot of data on why this is happening. The majority of the fire safety certificates that require revised information or further information is because the submission is very poor in the beginning, as opposed to the building control authorities not doing their job. So that's just something that has, this information shows us. So collating data information is very useful. We have our statutory with our building control register, and you see there on your left-hand side, and you can search that by local authority, by county, by local authority, by building type, by name, by address, by air code. And then we have a data portal with all the rest of the information in there. We have every single piece of information in that can be pulled out. The type of building, the material alteration, change of use, etc. And this is data that's quite useful for the valuation office use it to value their buildings, the department use it to count houses, the banks, businesses, economic operative forecasters use it quite a lot. The OSI and the CSO, etc. So it is very useful data and information to use. Not so much possibly for building control. We use that data and information to risk assess our buildings to inform us which buildings we need to actually inspect. So we have a tool on that. So what I'm trying to look at is that we have collected this data. We have a lot of data. The purpose of the data is to show how we comply with the building regulations, Part A to M. That's the whole sole purpose. So data for the sake of data and collecting data is just that. How we use our data is the most important thing. How we use our building control data is the most important thing. That's just an example of where we put a tool on top of our data in our data portal, and we risk assess the buildings that are submitted within the last 12 months for inspections to see where the risky buildings are. But then you have to look at that in the context, and professional judgment is very important. The biggest risk to using data is an over-reliance on risk assessment itself. So if you look at that there, you'll see the buildings in, say, Dublin and Dún Laoghaire and in the city areas being the highest risk. But what is a high risk in Cavan for maybe pollution of the lakes might not be a high risk in Dublin. So you need to actually look at that and use it for what it is. So risk assessment without looking at it, what your data says, and without on-site inspections is quite useless. So on-site inspections, competent, ethical owners, builders, designers in the design process is very, very important. So we just have to watch that we have a lot of data and that we don't over-rely on the data. What's the purpose of the data? To show compliance with the building regulations. What's the purpose of your procurement? To get good quality buildings. That's just another way of we're looking at the data there. That's the commencement notice with opt-out, declarations for the statutory certifications. These are commencement notices built across the whole country since they came in 2015, where there is no requirement for mandatory inspections and no requirement for a mandatory professional on the projects. These are one-off houses, and if you look at, we superimpose the severe exposure to wind-driven rain on those, where the most of them are built are all along the west coast with no professional to actually look at renders, look at how you could keep your rain out, how the durability, etc. So that's the kind of thing we need to be looking at when we're looking at data. Then we have modular methods of construction. That's another issue that we kind of look at and we pull them out of the system, and they're great, but it's not the panacea for solving the housing crisis either. We have to look at what we find is the gap between the off-site manufacturing and the on-site construction. Off-site manufacturing, the factory production comes out beautiful, building, lovely, and then it goes on to a dirty, mucky site, it's spilling rain. You might have not the same builders that were there yesterday. Somebody's off sick, somebody's sticking it together. That's a kind of an issue that we need to look at. I also just looking at the modern methods of construction, and there's quite a good group there, but I noticed that building control is missing off that group. Building control is the missing link in a lot of issues. We spend millions on planning and billions on remediation and very little on building control, where you could prevent problems from happening before they actually happen. Getting out on site early, that's just an offside there. So that's just, these are the things we find. Then with agreement certs are another interesting one. An agreement cert is just that. How do we use an agreement cert when we get on site? It's not a compliance with building regulations. It's a compliance that piece of kit or whatever you're producing if constructed exactly in accordance with that agreement certificate, complies with the agreement cert. You need then to look at how that is fit for that purpose, for the intended use in the location in which it's going to be used. And if you remember my high exposure map of Ireland there on the previous slide, you'll see that it may not be suitable for an exposed area. The inspections, as I said, very important part of what we do. We use our data to inform our inspections. We have tools on top of the information. We have quite a lot of assistive technology, drones, cameras, moisture meters, etc., that we use to actually check out our buildings. And like visibility on site, we find is the most important way of ensuring that we get good quality buildings. As I said, we use our data to inform this. We don't over-rely on the data. Having all of this data and millions of compliance documentation doesn't necessarily imply compliant buildings. We need to have competent professionals out on sites inspecting, mandatory inspections, mandatory visits, mandatory professional designers. Competent professional is very important. Like it's not a paper exercise. I just took out that comment there. The assigned certifier for us is only really a piece of paper. That's straight out of the CIF, stakeholder engagement. I'd be worried about that guy who's producing a modern method of construction and delivering it on site if that's what he thinks or she thinks of the assigned certifier. So there's a bit of training, a bit of work to be done. We in Building Control are only asking people to do what's the law since 1991, believe it or not. You'd think that we just invented it yesterday. Sometimes some people are still submitting planning drawings into our system. So really, paper never refused ink, rubbish in and rubbish out. So we just have to be quite, use our judgment to look at what all of this data we're collecting is about. What's the purpose of it? How we're using it? The objective is to get compliant buildings. We worry sometimes about an over-reliance on part, say, B, fire, everything's going to fire and we get killed. What about all the slow killers, the mould, the part Cs, the moisture ingress? The more people get killed falling downstairs, non-compliant parquet, than anything else, and that's a fact. Part L is another slow killer, not having proper thermal comfort in our buildings, not being able to afford it, not having our buildings insulated correctly. So a lot of these things that we're doing is because we didn't build a compliant building the first day. This is why our procurement needs to actually match that to what is the output. Operation and maintenance. Somebody asked me a question when I came in, what do I think of the new smart buildings? I said, they're absolutely marvellous, but like sometimes we actually haven't a clue how to use them. So we need operation and maintenance manuals to actually live in our buildings. Our buildings today and the way we live is much, much different than our buildings 50 years ago. We get a manual with our car, we get a manual with the toy, we get a manual with everything, and then we walk into a building that we're going to spend 3/4 of our income for 3/4 of our life, and we don't even get we just get the key. So a lot of we have this data, we have everything, but what we're looking at is the same defects, the same mistakes being made over and over and over again. So really, the competent person, competent professional on-site inspections, we're building buildings which has to be fit for purpose, and they have to be fit for purpose for at least 60 years. That's without any interruption, and most of our buildings will last 150 years. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mairéad. Excuse me. Thank you, Mairéad. I can see that you have actually a very large challenge going forward as the level of investment in residential properties increase in the country. And I'm sure that there's lots of questions that are going to come to you. Let's move on to the next speaker, Colmain. Good. Ross, Ross is Ross is from the National Building Controls and Market Surveillance Office. Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon. Wrong talk. We have had that one. Ross is the manager of the high-tech construction and housing in Enterprise Ireland, and he is going to speak about the Build to Innovate programme. Over to you, Ross. Thank you.
Thanks, John. And it's good to be at the Gibson Hotel. Does anyone admit why they know this hotel is famous? A few little giggles there. So there's a television show filmed here. Yeah, a few more nods, but still some people not admitting it. And I don't watch First Dates Ireland either, but my wife sometimes watches it. And while this rather charming and sweet show is on, I might be on my phone or whatever else. But the premise of the show essentially, and it takes place in the restaurant just beside us here, is that it's a blind date. And the producers match people actually fairly accurately from what I can see. And they film the date and you watch the people get to know each other, and that's all fairly straightforward. But where it becomes golden television is at the end of the date, where they call the two participants together, they put them in a room, sitting alongside each other facing the camera, and the producer says, "So, will you see each other again?" And the next 10 seconds of television is either wonderfully heartwarming or devastatingly cringeworthy and embarrassing, as you can imagine. Different answers can come out at that time.
Does that mean, Ross, you keep away from the restaurant?
Well, it depends now, John. If you want to go to that restaurant, you can go to that restaurant. It's where romance is made. I have to really reach for a segue from that into my talk. But I guess there is one. Enterprise Ireland is looking to meet new clients. Okay, so this mandate that we've been given is something that we've never done before. We are going to be giving grant aid to domestically focused companies. So we are out there looking for companies that we've never worked with before. My role, as it says there, I look after our high-tech construction and now housing team. So that basically means any construction services, products, and some tech companies fall within my remit for Enterprise Ireland. And my team's role essentially is to work with these companies to make sure that they have the capabilities and the offerings that are going to be competitive in the international markets. And ultimately what that will mean is that they'll be able to export, jobs will be created in Ireland across the country, and prosperity coming out of that. And as you can see from the figures there, this has been hugely successful in recent years. And many of you would be familiar with the growth of Irish high-tech construction, particularly data centres in Northern and Western Europe. And I was very privileged to be in Northern Sweden this week, just below the Arctic Circle, where there's 24 hours of daylight, which sounds lovely. It's not. It's very disconcerting and quite horrible, actually, to come out of a restaurant at 11 o'clock at night and it's bright skies. But I was on a site there with an Irish general contractor who was delivering a large data center for one of the hyperscaler clients. And there's between 15 and 20 Irish companies working on that site. And it was one of those sort of pinch me moments where you're walking around the site in isolated northern Sweden, the Arctic forest basically, and there's guys in GAA jerseys walking around and Cavan and Monaghan accents and all the rest of it. And it impresses you in terms it brings those numbers to light, but it proves just how capable our industry is. Because that is, look, it's a data center and it's a large demanding data center, but the environment that they're operating in there is very intense in terms of the climatic conditions and other demands on it. But the Irish companies they're hardworking, they're innovative, and they're solutions orientated, and that's what won them that job, and that's why they're delivering that job and already have won the next job with that client as well. But look, that's the traditional work that we do. And as I mentioned, what I'm here to talk about today is the new mandate that we've been given under Housing for All. And there's really two key actions under that. Just to speak about the Construction Technology Centre, and all I can do is speak very briefly on it at the moment. That's currently under contracts finalisation with the successful tenderer. But needless to say, housing, as we've been asked to do, will form a focus priority for that centre, particularly in the first year. But the piece that I will be speaking more at length about is our expanded mandate, and that is giving grant aid for productivity and innovation for the domestic residential sector. So just to recap on what this plan is in very short, you can see there it's an average of 33,000 homes a year. There was 20,500 delivered last year. So you can see it's a fairly aggressive growth. There are 4 pillars of it there, and it's everything from eradicating homelessness through to making homes more affordable for first-time buyers. There's a budget of €4 billion a year from the state, which has been fully allocated for the next 5 years. But the plan does acknowledge that this is going to place huge pressures on, let's face it, already very constrained industry. And just to bring that to light, these are figures from the Future Skills Group that have studied the housing market. And what they're looking at is that we will need an extra 27,000 workers on top of 40,000 in the next 3 years to deliver these types of targets. And ultimately, the plan on Housing for All admits that they may need 80,000 workers in this sector to deliver that plan. So that's a 68% increase in labour in 3 years, which is, let's face it, hugely challenging. And you can see just a brief analysis of where those people are, where the needs are. But I think one thing that we should note is that that assumes a similar level of productivity in the industry. And perhaps that's where there's a little bit of encouragement and a little bit of opportunity. So looking at the pie chart there, that's by the Society of Chartered Surveyors. They do this regularly, and that's the breakdown of costs of a 2-bed apartment. And you can see what we call the hard construction costs are 47% of the overall selling price of the unit. Curiously enough, a 3-bed semi-D is almost exactly the same. I think it's 48% of a semi-D is hard construction costs. And that's the area that I suppose Enterprise Ireland and others are going after to see, can we support a reduction of those costs with our new mandate? And we think, if you look at the other graphs there, they perhaps some people would say that's discouraging or problematic, in that productivity hasn't increased in this industry in Ireland in 10 years, and we are a laggard in European terms. But actually, let's call that an opportunity. Okay, look at the amount of growth that we could have in there. Belgium gets twice as much productivity out of their workers than Ireland does. So what can we do to try to meet that? And what can we do to push ourselves up? Because there's certainly room to grow there. So when we were given this new mandate, the first thing that we did do was a lot of, I suppose, industry consultations to develop what our strategy would be around delivering the new mandate. And time again, when we spoke to home builders, general contractors, they spoke about the availability of labour as the #1 constraint for them to grow to meet the sort of levels that we're talking about. So our strategy has, I suppose, coalesced around the promotion of modern methods of construction as a means of increasing productivity in the industry. And that's offsite. It's a fancy word for offsite. And to get there, we see that we can deliver training, new technology tools, and also innovation for offsite manufacturers. And I think Mairéad made a good point in that last talk around the training for companies around modern methods of construction. But if I just dwell on the offsite piece of it for a moment, because I think one of the things that people will criticize offsite for at the moment, and offsite is pretty popular actually. 48% of housing schemes or houses were built using timber frame in 2021. So it's already quite extensive. But what we want to see is even more than that extent, but also a greater level of pre-manufactured value on panels or volumetric builds. So even more done in the factory than done on site. But yeah, look, people will say, if you look at a house that's been built with timber frame and you look at a traditionally built house with blockwork, they cost at the moment pretty much the same when you're looking at it. But what that neglects is a few different things. One of the things it neglects is that the timber frame house has been built usually on program and much quicker than the traditional built house. So that means that your construction manager can move on both mentally and all the rest of it to their next project much quicker. So there's a time saving in terms of their management overhead. But what we're also seeing is that the offsite manufacturers are really scaling up at the moment, and there will be enhanced cost savings from that productivity or from that greater level of scale and purchasing power. But also then the pre-manufactured value. So companies, and I'll mention one of them, that are looking at putting cladding solutions on timber frame panels in the factory before going to site, and basically negating the need for block layers on site at that stage, and also scaffolding concerns, which is a huge problem at the moment for the industry. So that's all quite exciting. The other thing that I mentioned around offsite, and this is another nice statistic for people on a Friday morning. So household waste in Ireland, and this is bin collections, was, and the best year to use is 2019 actually, but it's 1.8 million tonnes in 2019 was your bins, your garbage collected from outside your house. Construction waste in that year was 8.8 million tonnes. So that for me is, when I'm putting out the recycling and doing my brown bins, a kind of a sobering statistic. And it seems to me that it's one that the construction industry will really have to tackle. And that's where offsite comes into its own as well. And the Housing for All plan does call for a sustainable, an environmentally sustainable building system. So offsite can achieve up to 30 to 40% waste savings on a project, which we think is highly attractive to people as well. So I'm about to go into some examples, 3 examples of the types of projects that we could support. But I realize, I suppose, that they're probably, I was trying to be inspirational with these projects, but they might actually be a little bit ambitious for some. So I just want to really highlight and not be misleading that we want to work with small companies, and we want to work with companies that are at a low level of adoption of, say, digital advancement. We can do projects at a very small level all the way up to much bigger comprehensive projects. And one of the grants that we can give, and I'd be more than happy to give many of these out to the industry, is the Digital Discovery Grants. This was called the Digitalization Voucher. We're just rebranding it at the moment. And that's a pretty simple project. It's a €9,000 project. We'll cover 80% of that. And it basically means a consultant goes into your business, and let's stick with, say, a home builder, general contractor, and they'll look at your process flow and what your business challenges are. And then they'll sketch up a plan of, well, look, if you implemented some greater software systems or tools or iPads on site, whatever it is, this is the type of savings or the type of objectives that you could achieve. And that's all that could be. And we'd love to work with companies to take that first step. And then we've got other steps beyond that as well that we can work with companies as well. So it's an iterative ladder, I suppose you'd call it. There is naturally, there's terms and conditions apply on this, and I should have put the star in the small print on the slide. But look, you have to be over 10 employees to work with Enterprise Ireland. That maintains. Our priority is, as you've heard, probably to work with home builders, general contractors, and offsite manufacturers, although there will be major subcontractors that will be interesting too. But any project that comes into us, we have to have some sort of at least dotted line to say, okay, if you do this, that ultimately could potentially reduce the cost of construction on site. So that's what we're looking at in terms of our return on investment for this state. Okay, so examples here. So this is a real example that a home builder did. They did a time and motion study of a construction site, and they saw that in a 10-hour day, the actual worker spent 2 hours, 40 minutes actually working. The rest of the time was in essence wasted. So from that, they undertook staff training and then looked at their processes. So induction, remote induction is getting popular, so that workers can do at least a chunk of the induction on their mobile phone, and that's captured on a talent management system of some sort. Then just even the location of tools, the availability of food, all that sort of stuff was studied, implemented, and they got 40 minutes back per worker from their day, which is obviously a huge time saving. There's issues with that type of project. Obviously, culture change is something, and then working with subcontractors and some general contractors and home builders will say, well, am I paying to train my subcontractors? He might go on to another job, and we hear that a little bit. Just also on lean, what we're seeing and what we've just funded with a medium-sized general contractor is the last planner system. And on that project in northern Sweden, they were using that as well. And that's beginning to grow in, I suppose, acceptance and credibility in the industry for general contractors. And it's quite an exciting system. It's really trying to take lean for manufacturing and implement it in the services element of construction. Okay, so then research and innovation, and I touched on this earlier. How do you add more value to, let's say, a panel? So, sorry, I should have mentioned. So let's talk about the money, the important bit of this. So we can fund a project like this anywhere between 50 and 70% of costs. And the types of costs that we do is the employees' training time. Okay, so we'll cover, for a small company, 70% of that employee's wages while they're on training, and then consultancy costs as well. And we'll cover, if you're bringing in trainers and stuff like that, we'll cover that. I think it's up to 50% or so. So they can be quite generous offerings. And these can range from, that could be a €50,000 grant up to, we've done projects with major contractors that have been a grant aid value of 1.2 million. Now there is caps on the housing for all stuff that we can do, which is more like €500,000 a year. But certainly generous, impactful funding, I would say. Okay, research and innovation. So wet trades is a huge issue, as people have mentioned. Block layers in particular, cost, availability, and the availability of the next generation of them is really not there. So timber frame manufacturers are looking at cladding solutions. So are light gauge steel companies like Frame Space are already doing interesting stuff in this area. But one of the timber frame guys, they're working with one of the institutes of technology to develop a solution for them that will be the Institute of Technology will tell them what it's going to be. But in terms of that project, we can fund that 80% of the costs of the researcher to develop that solution. And again, that's typically they're more in the range of, say, €100,000 projects that we can do, which is a chunk of time for a researcher for sure. We also have our traditional research and innovation grants, which is 25 to 45% funding, and that's your employees' time and consultancy time working on the innovation project. And this one is one that we'll probably see with offsite manufacturing companies quite a bit, from ICF, light gauge steel, through to timber frame. We're getting quite a bit of interest in that. And then finally is digitalization. So this was a general contractor who has really been very progressive around the implementation of digital tools, and they're doing a whole suite of things. So pushing BIM further and further in terms of their usage, as well as project management software and the greater implementation of that. This is a company that uses offsite quite extensively, offsite manufacturing systems quite extensively, and they see that they need the BIM and project management software to be able to do that most effectively. And one of the interesting things, I asked the company around their use of project management software tools to date in particular, and they talked about, I said, what's the impact? Like, what's the tangible benefit of bringing this type of stuff in? And they were able to pinpoint something. They were able to say rework has collapsed. And that was basically because of how they are managing their subcontractors with this, with these tools. And they were able to put a figure on it. So they said before their implementation of this technology, they had 2 crews on the road doing rework at the cost of €1 million a year. So just 2 crews constantly going around the country, going to do rework. And now they have no crews doing that, okay, because the quality of the finish from the subcontractors has been managed to such a standard. There'll still be little bits and pieces, but they don't need to dedicate resources to that. So I think that's a really nice and kind of startling way to look at the impact that digital systems can have. I think to finish, I'll say thanks to the sponsors, obviously, but I think there's huge challenges in this. Like if you look at that labour figure in terms of what needs to be made available, and it's not just Enterprise Ireland that's working on this, we're a small part of it. There's NSAI, IDA Ireland, obviously the construction sector group has been working on this for a number of years already and doing some really good stuff on it. But there's a huge challenge for the industry to meet the needs of both the Housing for All and Project Ireland 2040. And what I'd say is, I don't think traditional conservative approaches are going to meet the need of our society. I think our industry has to take risks. And I think our role as an agency and other government entities, what we need to do is try to support that industry, de-risk that as much as possible. And that's really what the purpose of our grants are. It's to incentivize companies to do something that they might otherwise not, and ultimately de-risk that project. I'd love to talk to people who want to know more. We can go on a date in the restaurant if you want at lunchtime, and I could tell you all about it. But otherwise, look, just thank you so much for listening and for your attention today. Thanks.
Well done, Ross. Tour de force. And our final speaker in this session is Jonathan Reinhardt. Is Jonathan here?
I am indeed.
Oh, you're coming. Okay, Jonathan, you have the floor.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Sorry, I obviously can't see into the room, but hopefully you guys can see and hear me okay. Apologies, I couldn't be there, unfortunately. Bit of a COVID situation in the household, but yeah, common story these days. So yeah, I'll try not keep you guys too long, and yeah, hopefully you've enjoyed a couple of days of CitA. I certainly have anyway. Watched a couple of good few sessions, and certainly the last few sessions been very enjoyable. So what I'm going to present on today is enhancing the architecture to construction journey. And I suppose why I chose this topic was I've taken a look at, you know, what sort of goals and aims that CitA were trying to achieve with CitA Tech Live event itself, the type of themes that they were trying to address. And I've tried to actually pick out as many of those as possible, and kind of to show you where Diatech customers are actually kind of supporting those type of activities within the industry across Ireland and across the UK, and then even from my own personal experience as well, being quite involved with the industry and being quite involved with academia as well. I'm seeing where a lot of these activities that CitA are trying to drive, and the type of themes that we're all trying to push in the industry to get closer to, I suppose, efficiency being part of that, being more lean. But obviously, you know, everybody enjoying their job as well. We all want to enjoy what we do, and we want to attract new talent as well. So that's kind of the whole ecosystem or story that I'm going to address this in this morning. So enhancing the architecture to construction journey. My background is in architecture. That's why I chose that as a story. That's my expertise. That's where I've worked for the last kind of 17 years or so within the industry across kind of Ireland, Australia, and in the UK as well. And the way I've kind of addressed that is looking at how we can support remote working, site execution, and data analytics. And a lot of this is based on what current Diatech customers are doing, and customers that I'm working with on a daily basis as part of my role with Diatech, and how we're supporting them in remote working, in site execution, in data analytics. You know, this is all work that we're doing as well, and I'm going to show you some examples of that, or how we're addressing that as well. So for those of you that don't know me, and I'm sorry, I feel like I'm always showing this slide a couple of times a week, and I'm sick of talking about myself at times, but just so you know my context, I'm a chartered architectural technologist. I've worked in BIM management, studied architectural technology. I've graduated from the BIM Masters in TUD. I was one of the first graduates, or in fact, the first of 3 graduates, back in February 2017 as part of that course. And I'm also now an assistant or BIM lecturer for the last semester in second year in architectural technology. So I feel I've hopefully shown you kind of my background and my context there. As I said, I'm kind of sick of talking about myself. So essentially what I've done is I've looked at the CitA challenges, and I said, okay, you know, how are we addressing these type of challenges currently? You know, how have we been doing this over the last few years within Diatech? And then again, even within my own personal experience, I've kind of just picked out a couple and maybe left a few out. I don't want to be taking them all away. But certainly, like, you know, huge challenges that we're seeing in the industry, shortage of skilled labor. It's been seen across almost all industries, and particularly we're seeing this massively in both construction and architecture, obviously, as well. And I suppose a part of that then is challenge 2, how that relates to challenge 2 about attracting and retaining a new generation as well. And from what I'm seeing in academia, the way students are learning now, what they're learning, you know, they're almost coming into the industry and they're teaching us what to do. And I suppose when I graduated, you know, or first started working in the industry back in 2005, it was a different story. You know, you were coming into an architectural practice and they were almost showing you this is how you work in a practice. What I see now, I suppose in my short 17 years, is it's almost the flip of that students and graduates are coming in and they're teaching us new software. They're showing us what they've learned in their studies. You know, if it's, you know, BIM skills or even broader digital skills or anything like that, you know, they're being brought into industry. So in my experience, that has almost flipped, and I think that's quite a pivotal point when we see that happening in any industry, that those new skills are flooding into the industry as well. So I'll kind of touch on some of those items. Other things that I'm going to mention around remote working as well, show you some solutions that we're currently doing for our Diatech customers around remote working, particularly around architectural working. And this actually comes back to the shortage of skilled labourers, because we're seeing some customers and companies, they're having to outsource work to different parts of the globe, and that feeds back into the remote working. They're using the same solutions that their staff, perhaps in Ireland or the UK, are using to collaborate with each other. You know, they're collaborating with people in different hemispheres as well, outsourcing work to kind of address that shortage of skilled labour as well. So that's all within that ecosystem as well. The remote working then, from an Autodesk perspective, it does, when you start to look at executing, you know, that design information on site, how do we actually then use that information on site? How are we utilizing that information on site? You know, if it's producing safety checklists, you know, stuff that people may find uninteresting, but it's extremely important, obviously, site safety. And that all feeds back into that ecosystem, that we can take that design information and we can actually relate a safety item to it, or a safety checklist to the installation of the stairs, the installation of a window. We can take a risk assessment and we can associate it with an air handling unit directly inside certain different types of cloud tools as well. And then data analytics being a huge part of that as well. And I think it's a huge future within our industry, is data analytics as well. You know, how can we take that data as well during the project, both during the project to manage and track, you know, whatever sort of progress on site, construction progress on site, as well as design progress as well. But what else can we use that data analytics for when the building is being operated? You know, what's the bigger picture of using that data 10 years down the line, 15, 20 years down the line, for replacement of all the windows, replacement of all the furniture, all of the doors, any sort of damage caused to a building? You know, we can kind of leverage that data analytics as well, or just raw data as well. So that all fits into that ecosystem. The most exciting thing, in my opinion, what I'll speak about today, is automating residential design. And I've touched on this before in certain CitA events as well. Is something called SpaceMaker. And this was a company that was acquired by Autodesk a couple of years ago. And I suppose in my role, I'm lucky enough to get access to this software. I suppose as an Autodesk partner, we get access to the software. I get to test it. I get to do whatever I want with it. So, you know, I'm quite excited to show you some of that, what is being done in automated residential design as well, and what's possible out there as well. I'm going to show you some examples. And then digital planning platforms as well, something I'm very passionate about. And actually in my master's thesis, I've kind of been, you know, singing about that since kind of 2015, 2016, about digital planning platforms. It's a huge place that we need to get to in Ireland. You know, what the solution is, I don't necessarily know. You know, and I'm not necessarily putting it on the councils. It's, you know, is it government investment we need? Is it more policy we need to address it? It needs to be done, and it needs to happen as soon as possible. You know, I've been on the receiving end of you know, invalidated planning applications, and, you know, 6 sets of, you know, however amount of drawings, application forms getting sent back to you. You know, from a sustainability perspective, even just from a sustainability perspective, we have to address that. And then even from a productivity perspective, you know, on both sides, we have to address that as well. And luckily in, you know, other parts of the globe, it is being done. It's been implemented for years. For example, in Singapore, and I'm going to point out some of the kind of initiatives that they have in there as well. So that's what I'm going to run through. I appreciate I'm kind of short in time, but I just kind of wanted to get those across. And just to express, I suppose, you know, when we talk about, you know, when we talk about attracting new generations, attracting, you know, new type of talent into the industry, from my perspective, my personal perspective is, as an architectural technologist, new technology to me, and being quite frank, it's about enjoying my job, to automate something that is uninteresting to do manually. So that if that's producing a window schedule or a door schedule, if there's a way around that, and that's kind of how I found interest in BIM quite a number of years ago, is trying to sort out the mundane things that were part of my job. And to lead on to my kind of intro point then, when we take something as boring or as interesting as a door, obviously important, we all want doors in our buildings, in our in our homes, whatever it is, that door in itself, or any type of object, and just using this as an example, that needs to go through a journey. That needs to start somewhere. It needs to be specified by a client. It needs to meet building regulations. It needs to meet certain expectations and certain specifications as well. So that goes through, simply put, it goes through a journey from the very start, from idea or concept. So effectively, once it's been spec'd or being put into a brief by a client, whether it's a hotel or a house or a row of houses or apartments, whatever it is, or pharmaceutical project, that door needs to be modeled or created somewhere, or produced as part of that journey. And if that's in some sort of BIM tool like Revit, for example, that is possible to produce that. And when we compare that to what we were doing before, it was quite isolated. And what we're actually able to do with that door or that piece of information now is we're actually able to collaborate on that information, and we're able to say, okay, is this the right fire rating on this door? Is it the correct clear opening width? And we can do that through various different types of cloud tools directly from inside our modeling software. So that connection itself, is extremely powerful. We've been doing it for years, but using something like Autodesk Bim Collaborate Pro, that's being done by Diatech customers on a daily basis and across the globe as well. And then if we want the client to review that door, for example, the door finish, do they want glass in that door? Are they happy with the fire rating? Is there some sort of comment they need to add to it? The type of ironmongery, the type of hinges, anything like that, the type of finish that they want on it, or the color. They're able to review that door then within that ecosystem. So it started in Revit, collaborated in Autodesk Bim Collaborate Pro, for example. Autodesk Docs can be used then to review, perhaps, and to approve that actual object as well. And then that information gets to site. Now, obviously, there's a couple of steps in there in between that to visualize and actually to see what type of information is part of that as well. That can then be retrieved on site using Autodesk Build, and if RFIs or something like that need to be generated, then those RFIs can be generated as well using Autodesk Build. And then all of that design, construction, auditing, any of that information, RFIs, can then be put into the owner's FM system. When that door, air handling unit, piece of furniture needs to be replaced, that information can then be retrieved. So the picture I'm trying to paint here effectively is that's all possible inside the Autodesk ecosystem. And that's from my own personal experience in the industry as well. You can do all of that within a single ecosystem. And that's extremely powerful. That's extremely lean. And the productivity and enjoyment that I've got from using that type of workflow, is really what propels me in just to enjoy my career as well. So to come on to get then the sort of shortage of skilled labor, like I mentioned, is Autodesk Bim Collaborate Pro. Effectively, what this allows us to do within Autodesk Bim Collaborate Pro, I'm going to skip through this video. We can model something in Revit, so somebody can do it on their desktop. Straight away, then that can be published into the cloud immediately, and then another user can retrieve that seconds later, literally, whether they're in Hong Kong, London, Sydney, or across the office from us, sitting in Merrion Square or somewhere. They can retrieve that information immediately. And this, for me, I was first shown this software when I was actually on the BIM Masters in TUD, and it actually blew my mind then, and it still does, how this is possible and the speed at which it can be done. I only think this is only the start of it, and it's still an extremely advanced piece of technology, in my opinion, my experience as well. To be able to do that and to be able to retrieve information, review information that was designed, and immediately review it within a cloud or browser environment in a different part of the world is just extremely efficient and extremely powerful. And then we can do lots more with that as well. We can clash detect those items, clash it against another person's model, or even review it and give feedback back to the designers. So that's using BIM Collaborate Pro. And what we're seeing with Diatech customers, this is supporting the shortage of skilled labor because they're able to outsource work as a result of using these type of products as well. Something to touch on as well, And I think the previous talk mentioned as well, just about, you know, SME firms, but also micro and small architectural firms, design firms as well. Extremely important. Why are they extremely important? Because they actually make up 43% of the architectural market activity in Ireland. So that's individual houses, extensions, loft conversions. That's massive. You know, we really rely on them, and it's huge. You know, it's so important that we look after them in terms of digitization as well, and giving them training, you know, making the tools available to these type of firms as well to work on those type of size projects. And then in Europe, that kind of level of activity is about 35%, but Ireland is 43%. So I've taken this research from the ACE or the architectural survey report in Europe as well. So Ireland has about 653 architectural practices, and you know, half of those roughly are made up of one staff and then two staff. So those type of firms are extremely prominent in Ireland, even though they may be small. So we really need to, in terms of digitization, we need to really look after them and give them the support that they need to get more digitized as well. Diatech can obviously provide that sort of service, but regardless of that, you know, we need to start looking at what small BIM or micro BIM away from the larger BIM. It's extremely important to consider that as well. In terms of attracting and retaining new generations, like I've seen in the industry or in academia myself, the new graduates they're teaching the industry, and the industry needs to be ready to meet their skills. So we need to have the software that they've learned in their studies. We need to have that ready for them when they come into their graduate roles or intern roles, whatever it is, and we need to facilitate them to flourish within the industry as well. It's extremely important and something I feel very strongly about. To mention on then the digital planning platforms, I've pulled this information from the Singapore Planning Council, or Singapore local government, should I say, and basically what you can download is a Revit template. You can download a Revit template from their planning website, and basically you can submit that Revit template with your building in it, and that checks if it's planning compliant, if it's building regulation compliant. This has been done in the industry by these guys since 2016 at least. There's no reason in Ireland. We have the tech skills, we have the capabilities. There's no reason we can't be doing this in the very near future, and it's definitely somewhere I'd like to get to. Something else we're also seeing a lot of and a lot of results in is using real-time visualization in architectural practices. The earlier design sign-off by clients is phenomenal in what we've seen. When you show them a visualization of their design initially, you know, it reduces so much time between the back and forth of just working from 2D drawings. And because that type of software now actually sits on top of Revit, for example, you know, it's extremely lean, it's extremely fluid workflow. And again, students are coming out of their studies with this type of skill in hand. You know, again, we need to facilitate that with them. We have the capabilities. There's no reason we can't be implementing this further across the industry as well. That's using a tool called Enscape for virtual reality. Then to what I mentioned then, just about automating residential design using something called SpaceMaker. Basically what this allows you to do is also generate a number of options within a building design using this browser-based tool. What we can actually do then with that design, so if we tell the site, for example, it uses AI and it will generate multiple variations of that site. All you have to do is put in various factors: the height of buildings you want, the number of apartments you want, the size of those apartments that you want, and it will generate multiple options of all of those using generative design or artificial intelligence as well. And then we can immediately export that from, there's a live connection from Revit to SpaceMaker. We can effectively open up SpaceMaker. So I actually have it open here in the background. This is an example site that I generated. I placed a couple of blocks, and then all I did was I wanted to explore some different options, and it generated for me 104 different results of all of these different apartment designs. I didn't have to do anything else. I pressed generate, and basically I can flick through any of these. It gives me the gross internal floor area. It tells me the number of apartments. It tells me the size of those apartments, the number of open space. And all I can simply do is choose one of those options, and I can immediately push that into Revit. So within a matter of seconds, it will open in Revit, brings in all of your floor levels, all of your wall buildups, all of your roof buildups, literally generated for any single one of those 104 apartment scheme designs for this scheme that has well over 100 apartments in it, as an example. So that's the type of technology that is being used in the industry. It's there, it's ready to use. You know, all it takes is the industry being ready for it to use it. And again, at Diatech, we can certainly support with that as well. So I am conscious of time, so just to kind of wrap up on my last couple of slides. SpaceMaker, extremely exciting tool, so I definitely recommend that any of you, if you're able to check it out or even contact ourselves, we can certainly go into more detail. Effectively, what it does is it can analyze the site, the capacity of the site, the feasibility of the site, the density that you're trying to address. It even does things like the vertical sky components for daylight, noise analysis as well, the size of the apartments, the mix of apartments that you want. Maybe you want 10% of one beds, 20% of two beds, and 30% of three beds, etc. It will do all of those 104 options that I looked at based on those various different factors that we can then edit and then immediately pull that information into Revit. And then once we start collaborating on that as well, like I showed with Bim Collaborate Pro, we can share those designs between colleagues, different design teams, wherever they're based. And that's using Autodesk Construction Cloud, like I mentioned already as well. I've shown this slide a lot of times before. This is Autodesk Construction Cloud. We can then take that Revit information, collaborate on it with different stakeholders, but then we can take that information to site from inside that ecosystem being that information residing in the cloud as well. So all of that design information started in Revit. It's stored in what we call ACC, or Autodesk Construction Cloud, and then at site stage, it's retrieved from Autodesk Construction Cloud as well, using a mobile app effectively as well. And then we can perform things like barcoding. We can place a barcode on a door, on an air handling unit, on any piece of object, and then with a mobile device, we can simply scan it, and it will actually pull up something called the asset information, and we can link that asset information back to the original building regulations, back to the original Revit information as well, within there as well. And then obviously performing things like site safety based on all of that as well. We can perform all of that at the site stage using checklists, whether it's BCAR or building regulations or whatever type of checklist, safety inspections. All of that is performed then on top of that same design information from inside that same ecosystem as well. And then just to finish off on data analytics, data analytics is a huge part of things like Autodesk Construction Cloud. It's been done in the industry for years. We know that in terms of, people are doing isolated data analytics. But what we're seeing now is it's becoming more integrated into the software and into the platforms. And Power BI is now Microsoft certified with Autodesk Construction Cloud as well.
Recording in progress.
So there's lots of different templates, that you can retrieve from that as well. Connect all of your design issues, any sort of information, project management information as well, and connect that into your Power BI. It's not just within the ACC platform that you have to use it. You can pull it into whatever you want as well. So that's all from me as well. Thank you all very much. Apologies again, I couldn't be there, and yeah, happy to stick around for Q&A.
Point, has anybody in the room got any questions? Or do I kick Ralph?
Hello?
You're on.
It's a question for Mairéad. We have an Irish standard now for information. It's 1950, adopted for Ireland with an Irish annex. It would seem the easiest way to get the whole industry to comply with that standard would be for every submission that's made to the BCMS to comply with that standard. And since the BCMS is an information management system, I suppose the question is, what is the National Building Control's Office position at looking at that standard for information submission?
Yeah, I did expect that actually when I saw you there, Ralph. But the answer to it is yes, with caution. We're looking at upgrading our BCMS now to BCMS 2.0, and it gives us an opportunity to look at what we're doing and how to streamline it. And as I was listening, there's a lot of, for the last couple of days, there's a lot of interesting pieces that we can actually add as additions to our system. It's been a slow process. We're only on the first iteration. We're going the second sort of generation now, 30 years later, really. So we will be putting out for stakeholder engagement on that one. And it won't be the bells and whistles, but definitely we have to start somewhere. The best time to start is now, really, on that. We're a bit behind the world, but we're getting there.
Thank you, Mairéad. Any other questions?
Another question for Mairéad. Sorry, Mairéad. Was a serious source of honesty and pragmatism in your presentation. You talked about the lack of inspection in Ireland. Is that really the key issue here, that we don't have the inspectors on the ground to check that the quality is there?
I suppose it's probably a personal thing from my experience in the last number of years supporting local authorities in inspections. Building control has probably been the poor relation to planning and to design and the providing housing, and we get this, we must provide a whole lot of housing, but building control is the key, and having competent building control officers on the ground at a very early stage in the project, the minute the commencement notice comes in, the minute that they start construction on site, you will actually identify from our risk assessment who the developers or builders that may be causing an issue or may have an issue. And if we get out early in the process, we can actually solve so many problems before they happen. But then there is I think a Harvard research paper on nobody ever gets credit for solving problems that never existed. And I think that's the poor old building control officer, really. But yes is the answer. We do need more building control officers visible on the ground, out early in the inspection process and trained.
John, thank you. Here, yeah. Go ahead.
My question is to Ross. You have provided quite interesting information about daily productivity in Ireland and how it is quite poor. But how do you measure it?
Productivity?
Yes.
Yeah, so the standard really crude measure of productivity is just revenue divided by employees. And then gross value added is a slightly different one, which I had to Google myself there in the last few days. And that's the hours worked on the site divided by the value of the project divided by the hours worked on it minus the direct labour costs.
Okay.
And that's your gross value added.
But do you count the actual working hours or the client working hours? So do you count the 10 hours or the 2.5 to 2.5 hours you found out to be a realistic rate of working hours performed on construction sites?
So I couldn't quite hear that. Say.
I'm asking, do you count for the planned working hours or the actual working hours? Because you have indicated in the presentation that the actual working hours were only 2.5 hours out of 10 in one construction site.
Oh, yeah, so that's actual, yeah. And then your other productivity measurements are actual, yeah.
I mean, like, is the actual working hours are the ones considered in the equation for calculating?
Oh, yeah, I get you. Yeah, no, so in gross value added, it would be the scheduled hours that were worked on that site, okay? So, yeah.
Well, just one comment on that is it's one project which is funded by Enterprise Ireland, and we're trying to overcome this problem by measuring actual data productivity by gathering passive real-time data from construction sites to be able to divide gross added value over the actual number of working hours on site. Thank you.
Yeah, great idea. Yeah.
Thank you. Actually, while you're here, Ross, I had a question myself. You mentioned the difference in productivity between Ireland and Belgium. Presumably you have some benchmarking done. I mean, is there any lesson from it?
Yeah, so that, thanks for that, because I meant to mention, that came from the 2019 KPMG report that was commissioned by, it was Deeper, and what they found, it was multifaceted. So it's everything from the planning system in Ireland, which prevents early contractor involvement in a project, through to the fragmentation of Ireland's home building industry, through to the methods of construction. So it was all the way across it. Digital tools were specifically called out in that as well. So yeah, it's a really worthwhile report to get into in more detail.
Thank you. Louis.
A question for Paolo. Paolo, in relation to the FAC1 contract, how is it performing in relation to the targets for time and cost compared to traditional contracts? Particularly, well, you mentioned about the Liscati project in Italy, but also in the UK.
In terms of the project that you mentioned, the Liscati one, the outcome that we got by using FAC1, as far as I remember, it was something like 48% of reduction in terms of time, and something like probably 15-20%, something like that, in terms of discount in terms of cost. And this is, as I mentioned before, in relation to the gold standard and the trial project that has been mentioned in that document. We saw that there is an 18.5 mark in terms of reduction of cost, plus the gains in terms of sustainability, quality, and insurance of those projects.
And Paolo, would those results be typical? I mean, there's been a lot of use of FAC-1 across internationally. Are they getting the same type of gains?
Yeah, they are quite consistent across the use in a worldwide scenario. What is really important is the education that we need to provide to the people involved, to educate those people in changing their attitude, their approach to the contract itself.
Because the actual savings you're flagging, I can see why any government wouldn't look at them with some concern and say, how do we actually get on board and get this type of result? You know.
I get your concern. Is something that we are getting more and more client involved, and we hope to help as much client as possible in this transition to a more collaborative approach.
Sure.
John, we have a
Yes.
question here.
Go ahead.
My question is for Mairéad, actually. Thanks for your great insight into the BCAR process. I suppose the question I have is, I noted your disappointment with the opt-out option for one-off domestic houses, and particularly you pointed out the West Coast, and it seemed to be mostly Cork, where there's a huge chunk above the national average. Has the BCAR stakeholders yourselves, I suppose, as an organisation, have you done any research into those houses that have, or those buildings that have opted for the opt-out option? And I suppose to find out, is there a problem there, or is there justification there to the government to say, well, actually we sampled 40% of these houses that opted out as a case study, and we found that 10% of those were, for instance, had defects or weren't compliant. Like, is there any justification there using your data that you have, and I suppose solving a problem maybe that isn't there or is there?
I suppose the way to answer that one is we don't know if we have defects until the defect manifests itself. And a defect might manifest itself for 10, 15 years or outside our 5-year enforcement period for building control. However, we have stepped up our oversight and our inspections of the buildings subject of commencement notice with opt-out declarations. We've also stepped up our requirement to the compliance documentation to demonstrate compliance, and I would probably say that in the next 18 months we will see more professionals involved in producing these compliance documentation for these buildings, because it really doesn't matter, they're going to be there for 150 years and we'll be given grants for retrofitting and everything in any event if we don't get them right. So I haven't really answered the question, but because I haven't got the absolute proof, but they do need to be monitored.
Sorry, and when you say stepped up, from what level to what level?
Very active inspections and very active requests for compliance documentation on all the submissions.
Okay, thanks very much.
Yeah, sorry, Mairéad, just as somebody who started his career in the local authorities, I mean, the fact that Dublin City Council has taken on the administration of this whole process, I mean, how do you work the collaboration with 31, I suppose you'd call them customers? These are the other counties.
Yeah, it's a shared service. Dublin City Council administer the shared service on behalf of the 31 local authorities. The 31 local authorities pay my salary and all our staff's salary and pay for the BCMS. And Dublin City Council pays a proportion of that. So we just sit in there. We could sit in Carlow as handy as anywhere else. We could sit anywhere else. So it's a shared service, just paid for by everybody. We have to have a base somewhere. Dublin City was it at the time. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. I think at this stage, maybe it might be good to break. Oh, sorry, you have got one.
No. Yeah, no, we have to finish it now.
That's okay. I was going to. Can I not have 15 minutes to? There's some things I'd like to get off my chest, Elena. That's out, is it? Okay, we're going to bring the session to a wind up, and I just want to thank again the speakers, for 4 very interesting presentations. Thank you.